You're on.
Ah, good morning, fellow attendees at virtual Balticon 55. Looks like we're ready to launch a presentation. Hi, I'm Paul Shuch, and I'll be your speaker for this hour. Let me go to, okay, where's my share screen? Stand by. There it is. And
Give it a presentation.
now we should be up and running. This is a continuation of a presentation which you may have attended at Balticon 52 or thereabouts, back when we were actually having live Balticons. And we're discussing a project called the Interstellar Beacon. I'm the executive director emeritus of the nonprofit SETI League. Of course, SETI is searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. And the whole model for SETI science has been to discover the presence of our cosmic companions by listening to their radio emissions. Some might say their radio pollution. We, after all, live on a radio polluting planet. We've been transmitting our presence for well over a century to anyone who might happen to be listening. It's been an inadvertent transmission, leakage radiation. But other civilizations that have radio technology will also, we assume, go through a radio polluting stage. So even if they're not trying to signal their presence to us, we have a good opportunity to detect the presence of technology. We call SETI searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, but we're really looking for extraterrestrial radio technology. And then there are those who say we've been listening now for 50 years. We've heard nothing definitive, so maybe it's time to shake the bushes a bit and transmit our information into space to attract the attention of others who might be listening. Well, one project that was intended to accomplish that goal was called the Interstellar Beacon. And my slide is not advancing. There it is. This is my friend Bill Kitchen. He founded a nonprofit organization called the Interstellar Beacon Corporation with the express purpose of transmitting Earth's presence into the cosmos. His goal was to make our presence known, not necessarily to engage dialogue, but to preserve Earth's history, culture, and very existence. The challenge is that life on Earth is extremely fragile. Our own planet will at some point ultimately cease to exist, either through natural disaster, a cosmic accident, or maybe even at our own hands. A digital backup of planet Earth is not only possible, but absolutely essential, Bill reasoned, if we are to assure the immortality of our planet and perhaps our species. So this was the challenge that motivated the Interstellar Beacon project a few years ago. Actual contact with others is controversial. Stephen Hawking said, for example, if aliens ever visit us, I think the outcome would be very much as when Christopher Columbus first landed in America, which didn't turn out very well, said Hawking, for the American Indians. Then, of course, there's the problem of self-destruction. Here's the famous doomsday clock on the day that we transition from standard time to daylight savings time. And when you spring forward, move the hand, of course, boom. Thank you, Randall Munroe, for this wonderful depiction. So Bill proposed to create a digital backup of everything on Earth and eventually use high-power laser transmitters to stream humanity's ultimate message into the interstellar cloud. And thus, the Interstellar Beacon concept was born. It was not without its detractors. Our friend David Brin, for example, likened transmitting into the stars to shouting in the jungle. When you're surrounded by ferocious beasts or potentially ferocious beasts, you hide your presence and merely observe. And this was a strong argument against what became known as active SETI, actually transmitting information into space. And the other acronym that you will hear is METI, messaging to extraterrestrial intelligence. And David is still to this day strongly opposed to METI because it would, according to him, be tantamount to shouting in the jungle. Of course, a counter argument is that that ship has sailed, or that horse has already escaped the barn, because we've been giving away our presence for well over a century now through our electromagnetic emissions. And this brings to mind analogies of horses and barn doors closing after the fact. So this is not a settled issue, but many believe that deliberate transmission is no more harmful than the inadvertent transmission that has been occurring for these decades. With regard to the fragility of life on Earth, Hawking, just before his death, was quoted as saying that Earth has, well, the headline said only 100 years left. This was from one of the web posts on this talk, but he actually said 1,000. 100, 1,000 in astronomical terms, they're irrelevantly, the difference is irrelevant. But Hawking said, I don't think we'll survive another 1,000 years without, and here was his solution, escaping beyond our fragile planet. He said computers can, in theory, emulate human intelligence and exceed it. So he's concerned about AI, artificial intelligence here. We cannot know if we will be infinitely helped by AI or ignored by it and sidelined, or conceivably destroyed by it. Here at Balticon, we had some presentations on AI and the future of AI and the risks of AI. And Professor Hawking was, I won't say fearful, but cautious. He said, I fear the consequences of creating something that can match or surpass humans. AI would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. He said humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. So his concern is, if AI dominates, what does this do to human intelligence or our place on our own planet? Another person with concerns is Elon Musk. He's concerned about natural disaster, he said. An asteroid or supervolcano could certainly destroy us, said Musk, but we also face risks the dinosaurs never saw. An engineered virus, nuclear war, inadvertent creation of a micro black hole, or some as yet unknown technology could spell the end of us. Sooner or later, said Musk, we must expand life beyond our little blue mud ball or go extinct. Now, this is pushing toward the idea of physical travel. And Carl Sagan himself said decades ago, if our long-term survival is at stake, we have a basic responsibility to our species to venture to other worlds. But what if we can't? What if the laws of physics and the laws of economics conspire against interstellar travel? The technology may be there, but the practicality or feasibility may not. And if we cannot escape our planet as living sentient creatures, what do we do to preserve our legacy? Well, Hawking said again, our only chance of long-term survival is not to remain lurking on planet Earth, but to spread into space. And Professor Hawking, I agree, but I suggest that if we cannot spread physically, biologically into space, maybe we can do so culturally. And this was, again, one of the motivations behind the Interstellar Beacon. Musk still pushes for physical transport off planet. We're figuring out, he said, how to take you to Mars and build a self-sustaining city to become a truly multiplanetary species. All very well and good, but of course, Mars at this point is the only known planet to be inhabited 100% by robots. So maybe they don't want us there. The vision of the Interstellar Beacon project was to see a time in the distant future when humanity, and in fact Earth, may no longer exist, but that our collective history, culture, science, and dreams will live on among the stars. Michio Kaku says, when we talk about the difficulties of achieving this, what we usually consider as impossible are simply engineering problems. There's no law of physics preventing them. Well, speaking as an engineer, he's partially right. We have engineering problems to overcome. But as you will see further into this presentation, in fact, there are some laws of physics that we have not figured yet how to conquer. And therefore, you will see throughout this presentation that what we once introduced here at Balticon as a brilliant future project is now fading into oblivion. The Interstellar Beacon project envisioned a four-program message, four distinct approaches. The mission statements spelled them out as bullets. Rallying humanity to create a digital archive of Earth, developing methods for encoding, enabling transmission of that information, building a powerful interstellar beacon transmitter, and then transmitting Earth's presence to other potentially habitable planets in the cosmos, so that others may be too far away to get here to visit us, or maybe whose governments have slashed their travel budgets just as Earth's governments have slashed ours. At least they will have an idea about who they share the cosmos with. And this whole concept was enabled by the advent of inexpensive, high power lasers for industrial purposes, but which could also be modulated and repurposed for communications purposes as well. My friend Bill, who founded this whole project, pulled together an interesting board of advisors. He himself, of course, is a broadcast engineer and an inventor and an innovator, an entrepreneur, a pilot, a life member of the SETI League, my organization, the nonprofit membership supported SETI League. We've existed now, this is our 28th year, and Bill joined early on as a life member. So of course he turned to the SETI League for cooperation in his dream project. He also recruited a professor from the Florida Institute of Technology. Dan Bachelor is the head of the Department of Physics and Space Science, and shared Bill's vision, and also brought to the table some resources in terms of his university's facilities, grad students, and he proposed to involve the university in making this vision a reality. John Spencer came to the table. He's an architect, an outer space architect, a futurist, a founder and the president of the Space Tourism Society, which you can find on the web. Space tourism right now is confined to suborbital flights, soon to be maybe downstream orbital flights around our own planet. But the Space Tourism Society sees someday trips to the moon, trips to Mars, cruise ships in space. Hey, now there's an idea for a TV program, cruise ships in space. Well, maybe it's already been done. Nova Spivak was recruited. He's a futurist. He's a venture capitalist in high tech, and he's a co-founder of the Arc Mission Foundation. Arc Mission, you may have heard of them indirectly when Elon Musk launched his Tesla Roadster into space with a Robot Man spacesuit on board. The Tesla also carried a group of very compact, very long-lived quartz discs, laser discs, containing, incidentally, the entire Asimov Foundation series in the glove compartment of the Tesla. Some of you will recognize Ethan Siegel. He's a theoretical cosmologist. He's a science writer. He does public outreach and science communication, but you've probably seen him in Balticon costuming as King Neptune. This was one of his more amusing costumes I saw in the hall, wandering the hallways of the con suite with his trident in hand. Another recruit to the board was Armin Ellis, a scientist and engineer, an explorer. He was a mission specialist at Jet Propulsion Laboratory on the International Space Station. He created an organization called the Exploration Institute to promote creative thinking. And again, you can find his organization online. So we've got a tremendous talent pool. And then there's this guy here. He's a retired professor of electrical engineering and physics. He's a radio astronomer and the co-founder and executive director emeritus of the nonprofit membership-supported SETI League. But you probably know him better as a filker. As an aside, my birthday always falls every year on the same day, amazingly, May 23rd, which almost always coincides with Balticon. So for a couple of decades now, I've celebrated my birthday here at Balticon. Last year, I didn't get to have a birthday party. This year, I didn't get to have a birthday party, but there's always next year. So what's the rationale behind this project? Well, no competent computer scientist would ever dream of not backing up his hard drive or her hard drive onto a robust and secure storage medium. Why would we presume to treat Earth's history, art, culture, and science legacies and aspirations with any less care than we do our trivial ones and zeros? At this point, we're going to take a short break from the presentation and we're going to launch into the Q&As. I'm going to have to bring up my questions on screen here and see what people have been typing in. It says no open questions. Just a comment that if you've been typing away into the general chat channel, I don't see that here. So if you want to retype any questions you might have at this point into the Q&A tab on your screen, I'll be able to read them and answer them as we go. There will be a couple of other Q&A breaks later if we don't have any at this particular juncture. Again, I see no open questions, so that means I've told you everything you want to know and we're done. No, certainly doesn't. We'll continue on with the talk, and another 10, 15 minutes in, we'll take another Q&A break, and let's see, open one. Here we go. How much information was slated to be sent out originally? Jerry, that's a great question. We envision, we'll be talking about Encyclopaedia Terrestria, and we'll come to this in the next section. The holy grail of SETI science has been to receive Encyclopaedia Galactica, all the accumulated knowledge of all the other civilizations in the cosmos. And we haven't actually received it yet. So, but we could reciprocate. We could put together our own Encyclopaedia Terrestria, sharing everything we can about Earth. And in a few minutes, I'll show you a slide indicating what it is that we actually intended to send. How do you decide which direction to point the laser? There's the challenge, Daphne. The answer is everywhere, but incrementally. You can't cover everywhere all at once. You have to cover everywhere, one little chunk of space at a time. How do you keep the laser pointing in the same direction? That turned out to be one of the major challenges. And the answer is we couple the laser into our greatest optical telescopes, which already have very precise targeting capabilities. Think the Keck telescopes on Mauna Kea. If we actually squirted our laser signals into the eyepiece of the Keck, well, it's not really an eyepiece because they digitize everything, but you get the idea. Mark says, please, they're not slaves. Grad students are indentured servants. Thanks for the correction. When I was a grad student, I considered myself a slave, but maybe you're right. Okay, that's a good start to the questions. Keep them coming and we'll reopen the Q&A panel in a few moments here. And let me see if I can close this. Just a moment. There it is. I'm trying to read my own screen. And we'll come back to some more Q&A in a few minutes. Also, by the way, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to migrate over to the Con Suite. And if your questions don't get answered here, we can chat for a little while there. Maybe the Con Suite might even send us to a breakout room. And finally, at the very end of the presentation, I will give you my email address. If your question doesn't get answered here, please drop me an email. Give me a couple of days to recuperate from the con and to travel home from this beautiful hotel and get unpacked. And I will certainly answer any questions I receive. So, moving on. No nonprofit organization, especially a small one with a limited budget, can do this all alone. So the Interstellar Beacon project decided to recruit some collaborating organizations to help out. My own organization, the SETI League, was the first one that they reached out to. This was a board meeting of the SETI League a few years ago where Bill made his presentation, and the board unanimously agreed to throw our efforts behind the project. not without some dissent amongst our membership, because again, shouting in the jungle, some of our members felt this was not what they signed on for. But at least we agreed to do the research portion of the project. Bill also recruited people from the Long Now Foundation, extreme futurists who look not tens, not hundreds, not thousands, but maybe even millennia into the future. Laura Welcher is a linguist, and she is a curator of the Rosetta Digital Language Archive, and we figured her skills in linguistics would help us to develop an encyclopedia terrestrial, which could be interpreted by and hopefully understood by civilizations with whom we may have nothing biological in common. So the question of making our message comprehensible was being addressed by Laura at the Long Now Foundation. I mentioned the Arc Mission Foundation Library. This is NOVA's discs that actually went into the glove compartment of the traveling Tesla in orbit. Buzz Aldrin stepped forward and volunteered the resources of his Aldrin Space Institute, such as they are, to assist with the project. Here's a meeting of John Spencer and Bill Kitchen with Buzz Aldrin. Looks like they were having a breakfast meeting to discuss Aldrin's involvement. Coincidentally, Aldrin is also located geographically very near the Florida Institute of Technology, and it had already collaborated with Professor Dan Batcheldor in some areas, so it was a natural inclusion for the project. And then we received from Professor Batcheldor and Bill Kitchen, and we being the SETI League, I'm wearing the billboard here, received an unsolicited proposal for a grant to do some of the research in this area. I'm not going to read the 3 pages of fine print to you. Suffice it to say that this was a request for funding, a modest amount of funding, $12,000, in order to get Florida Institute of Technology involved in answering some of the technical challenges that this project suggested. And we, the board of the SETI League, responded with an actual grant. I'm looking for the amount here, and if I can read my own attached level incorporated reference in. Well, I don't have it down there, but it was pretty close to what the Florida Institute of Technology had requested in the unsolicited proposal. But we broke it down into specific project phases so that we would be able to fund it incrementally, one phase at a time. If the first phase is completed successfully, then they get funding to go on to the second phase and so forth. And this was a little over 3 years ago that we actually pulled the trigger, so to speak, on releasing some funds to kickstart the project. And phase 1 involved simply testing known technologies to see how they might be used in this rather ambitious transmission project. And in phase 1 testing, it consisted of the professor and one of his grad students just demonstrating in the classroom a free space laser communications path over a modest distance of 18 feet using very, very low power lasers, the type that you might find in a laser pointer when you're giving a lecture in the classroom and trying to highlight something on screen. And all they did was basically couple their laser pointer to a transmit telescope and a laser detector to the receive telescope. And they were observing the spread of the beam with and without collimation. Collimation is a focusing, an optical focusing that tries to spread rather than narrow the beam. And spreading the beam actually allows it to cover a larger geographical area at its destination so that we could illuminate not just a spot on an exoplanet orbiting a distant star, but maybe an entire stellar system at that distance. And so they did some experimentation with collimation, and they proved that these lasers could be efficiently coupled into the eyepiece of existing telescopes. And that was the end of phase 1. It was a very easy, very trivial first step. baby steps. We take one step at a time when developing technology, especially technology for science. Phase 2 testing was slightly more ambitious, and it involved expanding that laser communication system a little bit into an optical image that was scanned, digitized, basically just like we're doing right here now, transmitting this optical image to you via the interwebs. And the output of the capture computer was fed into through a USB port into a UART, that is a universal asynchronous receiver transmitter module. The outputs of the UART were used to modulate a low power laser, which was connected to a telescope through its normal eyepiece. And at the receive end, the reciprocal process, the eyepiece of the telescope is equipped with a photodetector, the output of which drives a UART in the opposite direction to create a USB signal, which is fed into a computer to reconstruct the original image. A little more ambitious in terms of scope, complexity, modulation modes, and also range. By the way, you can see they use one of the pretty green lasers here. This is just for art for art's sake here, and has no technical significance other than, boy, that's a nice shade of green. The way they do the green lasers, by the way, I don't know if you're aware of this. It's rather hard to laze in this color, but infrared lasers exist abundantly for the telecommunications industry. Infrared lasers are what feed the data through the fiber optics that many of you are using to receive this particular conference. And those infrared lasers are at a frequency of approximately half of what green is on the optical spectrum. So all they had to do is take an infrared laser to make the green laser pointers, feed it through a frequency doubler, which is just a diode, and in goes 250 terahertz, out comes 500 terahertz approximately, and you create green. So that's what they were playing with here. But here's the interesting part. They set up the transmit telescope on the roof of the science building, and they set up the receive telescope 500 feet away on the roof of a parking garage, and they experimented with aiming on these rather small telescopes over a relatively modest distance. But phase 2 proved that they could transmit an image across campus with kludged together laser pointer type technology and recover the image in a computer at the other end. So this was phase 2, and it was completed successfully. Phase 3 was significantly more ambitious. And I should tell you at the outset, we never progressed to phase 3. We never actually got there because we had availability of these high power laser systems in the infrared, and these high power lasers was reason could be coupled to the existing optical telescope eyepiece at the university, turning the telescope from a receive device into a transmit device. And then we were going to attempt to replicate interstellar space. Now, how do you do that? Well, at a small scale. The idea was, what if we can establish a communications link with the moon, between the Earth and the moon? We could. The telescope would do that. The problem is we could transmit from the Earth to the moon, but there were no astronauts there with receive telescopes and receive laser decoding systems able to determine that the communications was successful. But there didn't have to be. Because on the Apollo, I guess 14 through 17 missions, astronauts left behind on the lunar surface retroreflectors for exactly this type of experiment. A retroreflector receives the laser signal, turns it around fairly efficiently, sends it back to Earth. And now we can do a round trip experiment with one telescope, because the 2.5 minute round trip delay from Earth to moon at the speed of light and back from the moon to the Earth again through the retroreflector gives us time to switch the telescope into transmit mode, send a couple of seconds worth of digital data, and then switch the telescope into receive mode and recover that same digital data and analyze the signal loss, disruption, scrambling, any sort of anomalies that have occurred in the route to the moon and back. It's not interstellar distances, but it's a good proof of concept of using a telescope over significant ranges. So that was the idea behind phase 3. But as I say, it didn't happen. Our ultimate objective in SETI was beautifully articulated by Carl Sagan in the original book and TV series Cosmos. Our initial objective was to receive Encyclopaedia Galactica, the accumulated knowledge of the cosmos. And if we looked long enough and tuned to the right frequencies and pointed to the right stars, someday, if there is indeed a galactic community sharing information, someday we can gain membership at least at the reader level to Encyclopaedia Galactica. Maybe later we could be contributors, but for now we would have to satisfy ourselves with reception. Well, the Interstellar Beacon and other METI projects have turned that whole idea on its head. Instead of trying to receive Encyclopaedia Galactica, maybe we could be transmitting Encyclopaedia Terrestria, and it already exists. The accumulated knowledge, history, experience, art, culture of planet Earth already exists on Wikipedia. Many, many petabytes large, and it already exists in digital form. So maybe Encyclopaedia Terrestria could be simply beaming the entire contents of Wikipedia into interstellar space, so that these photons may someday fall on friendly shores and convey our whole planet's history, art, culture, and science to our cosmic companions. We wouldn't be teaching them anything new. Earth is a relatively young planet orbiting a relatively young star. The cosmos is full of much older stars, which are hosts to much older planetary bodies on which much longer-lived civilizations may have existed. We presume that we are the adolescents in this interstellar society. We're not going to teach our elders anything new, but we can at least say, hey, Dad, look what I've learned. And this creates some useful information, hopefully for them to understand something about the evolution of intelligence, culture, and technology. So we would not be teaching them, we would merely be saying, look what we have accomplished, and should we cease to exist, maybe that knowledge will continue. Freeman Dyson was concerned. Professor Dyson at Princeton University was very concerned that if one organization can transmit into interstellar space, so in time can everybody. And if everybody who can get his or her hands on a transmitter and a telescope, a microwave dish, or any sort of communicative technology, if anybody can get his or her hands on this technology, everybody can transmit into space, and the result will be utter cacophony. A multitude of voices all speaking at once in different tongues with different mindsets and different philosophies and different goals and objectives. And Professor Dyson said this would be utter cacophony. And then he said, but you know, there is no better, truer, or more honest representation of planet Earth. I like that. So we got to the point where we were ready to consider and contemplate phase 3. I put together a quad chart in standard NASA format to publicize the project to others. And I published this particular quad chart 17th of May, 2018, which was, of course, Balticon week. And I presented it at Balticon 3 years ago. For those of you not familiar with the quad chart format, we have 4 different quadrants visible on screen here. In the upper right-hand corner, quadrant 1 is typically a picture, an image of some sort. Quadrant 2 to its left is a verbal overview of the project. In this case, challenge and proposal. You've seen these on slides already. Quadrant 3 below that, in the lower left corner, is a vision statement and a mission statement for what you're going to accomplish. These are all easy. And then the hard one was quadrant 4 on the lower right corner is scheduled milestones and accomplishments, laying out the plans and breaking down for each step the TRL, the technology readiness level, which we have achieved or will have achieved with each step. TRLs are a scale from 1 to 9, where 1 is the inception of a project or mission, and 9 is a successfully completed project or mission. The TRL system has been used for spaceflight programs since the beginning of the space age. And level 1 for unmanned spaceflight was envisioning the ability to launch satellites. And TRL 9 was accomplished by the Soviet Union in October of 1957 with the launch of Sputnik 1. And in between there were these various steps. So we laid out the steps for the Interstellar Beacon, which achieved TRL 1 when the concept was articulated in September of 2016. TRL 2 was accomplished when we launched our website. The first meeting of the advisory board in January 2017 brought us to TRL 3 and so forth. Different steps along the way, culminating, we thought, the first digital transmission would occur in October of 2018. We were overly optimistic. It didn't happen that way, but at least we had a plan. So what really happened in September of 2018, there was an amateur radio conference in Horsham, Pennsylvania, which is just north of Philadelphia, and actually in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, right near Horsham. At any rate, I was asked to give a presentation on this project to a group of advanced experimenters. Now, the SETI League's membership is composed of a very high level of representation from the amateur radio community. You may think of radio hams as people who just send Morse code with manual keys or talk into a microphone around the world, and that's part of the hobby. But ham radio has also been an area for collaboration and exploration in technology advancement since its very beginnings. And the ham conferences that I have regularly attended, some of you have also attended. I know we have here at Balticon a lot of people who also hold amateur radio licenses. Some of you are experimenters. We pioneered microwave communication. What good is it? Well, your cell phone will answer that question. The technology that hams pioneered became the cell service or satellite radio or satellite television. This all came from radio amateurs. And a lot of radio amateurs have contributed to radio astronomy and SETI, and we hoped maybe METI. So I accepted the invitation to speak at the Mid-Atlantic VHF conference north of Philadelphia in September of 2018. And I made my presentation to a room full of, where are you? Oops, went too far there, back up. We had a room full of about 80 advanced experimenters. These were very senior radio microwave experimenters, some of whom had optical experience as well, optical communications. I made my presentation, pretty much the presentation that you've seen up to this point. And then, just as I'm going to do now, I opened up that particular room to questions and answers. And I'll take your questions next, and then I'll tell you the critical question that was asked at the ham radio conference and how answering it led us to change direction. And with that, let me open up my Q&A panel. Mark Roth, great question, a great comment here, Mark. 20 years ago, instead of Wikipedia, I would have suggested all the FAQs of Usenet. That's a great concept. I think we've gone beyond Usenet now. Well, some of us have. Tim says, how do you create the laser pointing in the same direction? I think we answered that one already. We use the same positioning equipment that exists on the world's great optical telescopes now. For the laser transmitter, the power aperture would be, this is Wisdom Keeper. The power, let me see. Oh, these are scrolling off the screen fast. Okay, for the laser transmitter, the power aperture product would be, well, Astronomical. Oh, yes. You take a Keck telescope and you put a kilowatt laser at its aperture, and you multiply that by the gain of the telescope, and you've got a tremendous photon density. And that was the reason that we could achieve, or so we thought, interstellar range to cover 4 high-ster of a finite amount of time. Well, the nice thing is we're not limited to a finite amount of time. There is no transmission schedule. It's not like a Balticon presentation where you know the panel will occur at 11:30, and if you're not there at 11:30, you'll miss the panel. We would be transmitting for as long as budget and technology allowed. And the idea is eventually, maybe centuries, maybe millennia, with the technology always getting better and better as we learn more, at least up until the point of self-destruction. So yes, it would take a very finite amount of time, a large finite amount of time to cover the whole sky. And you do this step by step. Tim asks if I'll be joining us at the Dead Dog Filk. I'll try to be there, Tim. Thanks for asking. How do you keep the laser from hitting Earth satellites? Well, you start off with having a really good catalog of all the Earth satellites out there, and then you just build exclusions into the aiming software, Tim. Let's see. Taras, yes, Bob Forward did send an encyclopedia to his neutron star dwellers, yes. I guess if we could get our hands on Bob Forward's encyclopedia, that would be great. Well, we had to start with something, and Jimmy Wales was more approachable at this point, I think, than Bob Forward. Steve says, how long would it take to transmit an Encyclopaedia Terrestre over possible interstellar communications link? The answer has to do with baud rate. How many bits per second can you send? And that was the next phase of our research, and that's where we started running into problems. Have you contacted the Library of Congress? No, because at this point, Jerry, we were intent on developing the technology first and the data later. And the reasoning was very simple. The data will always be there. If we run into a technology roadblock, why should we spend resources accumulating data? And as you will see shortly, we did run into a technology roadblock. Can the placement of radar pads mess up the laser pointer by pointing by asteroids? Carol, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Let me see. Radar pads mess up the laser pointer by asteroids. If you can elaborate on that, I'll try to get back to that, Carol, during the next Q&A session. Daphne says, how many wavelengths are you going to use, and how did you pick those? Well, we hadn't gotten that far yet, Daphne. As you'll see, we contemplated using multiple frequencies, multiple wavelengths, but we had to find out which were going to be most compatible with error-free transmission through the interstellar medium. And that's what we're going to jump into now. So if you'll bear with me. Sorry, I missed the tech roadblocks. I didn't say them yet. They're part 3 of the presentation. That's what's coming up next.
You have 7 minutes left.
Okay, I'll move forward then. Well, let's see. The pads on the moon that bounce off the laser signals. Oh, okay. The placement of the pads is such. Retroreflectors are omnidirectional, well, within their field of view. The retroreflectors are designed so whatever they receive, they will send it back in exactly the reciprocal direction. Sun flares mess up data transmission. That's their problem with the receive end, not our problem on the transmit end. That was Jane's question. I'm going to move forward here and wrap up the presentation in these next 7 minutes. The break is over, and now let's introduce you to my friend Andrea. Andrea was one of the ham radio enthusiasts and engineers who attended my talk at the the Northeast VHF conference in 2018. Andrea is best known to the ham radio community as the builder, designer, and operator of this rover station that's infested with antennas. Andrea goes around the country doing microwave and VHF and UHF radio experiments and setting communications records and participating in contests. She's best known to the ham radio operators as Madam Rover, And yet she is a very competent, very talented engineer, electrical engineer, with a lot of expertise in free space optical communications. And during the Q&A session at the HAM conference, she threw a question out there: what about interstellar dispersion? And I had to say at the time, I'll get back to you on that. So what is interstellar dispersion? Interstellar dispersion is a phenomenon that is affected by photons traveling through interstellar space. And it tends, if you have a modulated signal, to disrupt the modulation, to interfere with the information content. The solution is to slow down the data rate. But we, for this project, contemplated needing very high data rates, very high baud rates. So we went to the literature and we found Phil Lubin. He had published a number of articles. Phil's at the University of California, Santa Barbara in the physics department, and he had done a lot of work with interstellar dispersion for free space laser communications. He published some papers there. One was in the Physics Archive at Cornell, and Search for Directed Intelligence. I'm not going to read the abstract. Here was another paper in the archives where he he actually collaborated with two colleagues of mine, David Messerschmidt and Ian Morrison, from UC Berkeley and Swinburne University, respectively. And they came up with a way of modeling interstellar dispersion on laser signals, which is just the sort of problem we were trying to investigate. And based upon their recommendations, we the SETI League, acting for or with the Interstellar Beacon project, subcontracted, again, a very small contract, to Kevin Parkin in San Francisco. Kevin is an expert in computer modeling of communications challenges. And we hired Kevin to come up with a computer model that would find out the effects of interstellar dispersion on our planned project. What Kevin did was he took a spreadsheet that I had written for microwave communications decades ago, and he tweaked it and he added some of the additional variables that are a factor for optical communication. And we used his spreadsheets to run many, many simulations, at the end of which we saw that we, Houston, had a problem. And the problem is that we cannot change the laws of physics, just like Scotty can't. And the laws of physics basically caused significant distortion to our data set when we tried to transmit at high data rates over interstellar distances. This had never been tested, but we had a good mathematical model that proved that if we put Encyclopaedia Terrestre into the meat grinder and we turned the crank, out would come hamburger. And that hamburger, that ground beef, it certainly is communication. It certainly is intelligent communication, but it has very limited utility because the contents of the message get scrambled. Without getting into technical details, suffice it to say that interstellar transmission of Encyclopaedia Terrestre is going to result in reception at some distant location, which is clearly artificial, answering the question, do we exist, but totally devoid of intelligible content. This is a one byte message. If you take a bite out of the hamburger, all you get is, here we are. And you can't read Encyclopaedia Terrestre anymore because the data rate interacts with the interstellar medium in such a way as to obliterate meaning. And we found no way around that using any technology known to us at this point in human history. So this has implications for the Interstellar Beacon, but it has larger implications for the wider world of SETI. Because if our goal is to receive interstellar messages that are rich in content, if we really think we can receive Encyclopaedia Galactica, as Carl suggested, we have to realize that the same interstellar meat grinder is going to take Encyclopaedia Galactica and turn it into hamburger as well. And when we take our one byte of that hamburger, we still have useful information, but that useful information is simply, you are not alone. And that's as far as we can get with our known technology and the limitations of the interstellar medium. So this spells the end of the Interstellar Beacon.
And the end of your talk.
And I guess at this point we have time for maybe, let me take a look at the queue.
We don't have any time for questions.
I show 12:21. Is that our ending time?
Yes.
Okay, I do apologize, folks. Tell you what, if you have further questions that didn't get covered, see me over in the con suite and we'll be chatting there. And thank you so much for your participation and attention. Thanks for our tech people for keeping us on track. And maybe next year at a live Balticon, we can analyze these implications further.
Thank you.